Reports are coming in from the outskirts of the jungle.
Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Rambo is one of the most iconic action film franchises ever created in the history of Hollywood cinema, originating from the United States of America and based on the character created by author David Morrell in his 1972 novel, First Blood. The franchise is produced by American Film Studios and belongs to the action, war, and thriller genres. The character of John Rambo became a cultural symbol of war trauma, survival, and unstoppable vengeance, and for decades he has represented one of the most feared and respected cinematic warriors. The series officially includes 5 films released between 1982 and 2019, with the 5th film titled Rambo, Last Blood. Although many people refer to the next possible movie as Rambo 6, it is important to understand that no official movie titled Rambo 6 has been confirmed by any major studio as of now. However, rumors, fan discussions, and industry speculation continue to circulate, mainly because the character is so popular worldwide. The Rambo franchise was originally produced by Carolco Pictures and later by Lionsgate and Millennium Films. The role of John Rambo was made legendary by Sylvester Stallone, who not only starred in the films but also co-wrote or fully wrote most of the scripts and shaped the direction of the character over decades. Stallone's portrayal turned Rambo into an international phenomenon, especially popular in the United States, Europe, and South Asia. Each film reflects different political and psychological layers of warfare, from the trauma of Vietnam War veterans to Cold War politics and later modern-day cartel violence. The latest officially released film in the franchise is Rambo, Last Blood, which came out in 2019 and was marketed as the final chapter of John Rambo's story. The film was directed by Adrian Grunberg and produced by Millennium Media with distribution by Lionsgate. It presented an older Rambo living in isolation on a ranch near the U.S. Mexico border, trying to live a quiet life after years of war and destruction. However, when his adopted family is devastated by a brutal Mexican cartel, Rambo is forced to return to violence one final time. The story shows a deeply scarred man who has tried to escape his past but is dragged back into it through loss and revenge. The movie is extremely violent, emotional, and dark in tone, and it emphasizes that Rambo's life has never truly known peace. After the release of Rambo, Last Blood, many fans assumed the series was permanently finished. Sylvester Stallone himself indicated multiple times that this was likely his last appearance as John Rambo due to his age and physical demands of the role. This created a feeling of closure around the series. However, not long after, online rumors began to appear about something referred to as Rambo 6 or sometimes Rambo, New Blood. These rumors claimed that either Stallone would return for one final mission or that a new younger character would take over the legacy of Rambo. None of these ideas, however, have ever been supported by an official film studio announcement. Many of the alleged trailers for Rambo 6 that people see on YouTube or social media platforms are actually fan-made trailers. These videos are created by editing scenes from older movies, combining them with background music and fake titles. These trailers often mislead viewers into thinking an official sequel is coming. Several entertainment websites have investigated these videos and confirmed that they are not connected to any real production. No reliable Hollywood trade publication such as Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, or Deadline has confirmed any project titled Rambo 6. What has been officially announced instead is a prequel film titled John Rambo. This project is being developed by Millennium Media, the same company that produced the last few Rambo films. This movie is not a sequel and not Rambo 6 in the traditional sense. Instead, it is a reboot-style origin story that will explore John Rambo's early life before the events of the first film. The prequel is planned to show Rambo as a young soldier during the Vietnam War, focusing on how the trauma of war shaped his personality and his later life. This project will not star Sylvester Stallone. A new younger actor is expected to play the role of Rambo. The prequel, John Rambo, is directed by Jalmari Helander, a filmmaker known for intense survival-style action movies. The script is written by Rory Haynes and Saurabh Nashirvani. The storyline reportedly explores Rambo before he became the hardened drifter seen in First Blood. The film aims to show his early optimism, his military training, his brotherhood with fellow soldiers, and the brutal psychological transformation caused by war. The tone is said to be serious, emotional, and violent, but with more character depth than the later action-focused sequels. As of now, this prequel is still in development, and filming is expected to begin in the coming years. Because of this officially announced prequel, many fans mistakenly assumed it was Rambo 6, but it is actually a reimagining of the character's origins rather than a continuation of the old storyline. This confusion is the main reason why the idea of Rambo 6 continues to spread across the internet. According to the most common rumors surrounding Rambo 6, New Blood, the story would allegedly focus on an aging John Rambo being pulled out of retirement for one last mission. Some rumors suggest that a young protege, possibly a former soldier or special operative, would assist him. Others claim that Rambo's past enemies would resurface, forcing him to settle unfinished business. Another version of the rumor says that the story would involve an international terrorist group or a government conspiracy. However, all of these storylines remain unverified. None of them are backed by official production paperwork or studio confirmation. In the original 5-film storyline, John Rambo is a former Green Beret and Medal of Honor recipient who suffers from severe post-traumatic stress disorder after returning from the Vietnam War. In First Blood, he is harassed by small-town police and pushed into a violent survival situation. In Rambo, First Blood Part 2, he returns to Vietnam to rescue abandoned prisoners of war. In Rambo 3, he fights in Afghanistan against Soviet forces. In Rambo, 2008, he helps Christian missionaries in Burma. In Rambo, Last Blood, he faces a brutal criminal cartel in Mexico. Each film shows a different phase of Rambo's life, but all share common themes of loss, betrayal, survival, and the cost of violence. Sylvester Stallone's portrayal of Rambo is widely regarded as one of the most physically demanding roles in Hollywood history. He spent decades training intensely to maintain the muscular appearance required for the character. Stallone also shaped Rambo psychologically, presenting him not just as a killing machine but as a deeply wounded man struggling to find peace in a world that constantly drags him back into violence. The cast of the Rambo franchise has included many famous names over the years. In Rambo, Last Blood, Stallone starred alongside Paz Vega, Yvette Monreal, Adriana Barraza, Sergio Perez-Mencheta, and Joaquin Cosio. Each actor played a role in shaping the final emotional arc of the story. The villain in Last Blood was portrayed as a ruthless cartel leader, symbolizing modern-day criminal violence rather than traditional wartime enemies. The production of Last Blood involved filming in Spain and Bulgaria, although it was set along the U.S. Mexico border. The movie had a reported budget of approximately $50 million and earned more than $90 million worldwide at the box office. While the critical response was mixed, the film was commercially successful and maintained Rambo's reputation as a high-impact action brand. If Rambo 6 were ever to happen with Stallone, it would require massive coordination between studios, insurance companies, and international distributors because of Stallone's age and the physical risks involved. Industry experts believe that a direct sequel with Stallone is highly unlikely unless the story is very limited in physical action or heavily supported by a younger co-star. The prequel, John Rambo, on the other hand, represents a strategic attempt by the studio to keep the franchise alive for future generations. By starting with a young version of the character, the studio can potentially create a whole new series of films without relying on Stallone. This approach has been used successfully in other franchises such as James Bond and Batman. There is currently no official release date for John Rambo, and no official cast list has been finalized publicly. The project is in active development but still in early stages. Once casting and filming begin, a release window will likely be announced through major entertainment news platforms. As for trailers, there is no official trailer for Rambo 6, because no such movie officially exists. Any trailer claiming to be for Rambo 6 is fan-made. For the prequel, John Rambo, no official trailer has been released yet either, because the film has not entered full production. In conclusion, the Rambo franchise is a legendary American action series created from a novel, transformed into a global phenomenon by Sylvester Stallone, and sustained for over 4 decades. While many fans eagerly search for Rambo 6, the reality is that no official 6th sequel continues the original story beyond Last Blood. The future of the franchise lies in the upcoming prequel, John Rambo, which will explore the beginnings of the character rather than his end. Until a studio formally announces Rambo 6, all such information should be viewed as speculation and rumor rather than confirmed fact. Beyond its surface identity as a brutal action franchise, Rambo has always been a deeply political and psychological series. From the very first film, First Blood, in 1982, the franchise established itself as an intense commentary on how war veterans were treated after returning home. John Rambo was not created as a superhero but as a broken man abandoned by society. This foundation shaped every sequel that followed and is one of the reasons why even today, more than 4 decades later, the character remains powerful in the minds of audiences. When discussions about a possible Rambo 6 arise, they are not driven only by nostalgia for action but by the emotional weight of a character whose journey has never truly found peace. The production design of the Rambo films has always emphasized realism blended with cinematic intensity. Jungle warfare, muddy battlefields, abandoned towns, tunnels, caves, and rural isolation are recurring visual symbols. In Last Blood, this shifted into underground tunnels beneath Rambo's ranch, symbolizing the hidden trauma within his mind. This tunnel system was inspired by real survivalist bunkers and military trap designs. It represented how Rambo, even in supposed retirement, still lived like a soldier preparing for war. This visual metaphor was one of the most important storytelling tools in the final film and strongly reinforced the idea that war never truly leaves him. Sylvester Stallone's involvement in the franchise goes far beyond acting. From the first movie onward, he worked closely on script rewrites, character development, and even the ideological direction of Rambo. Stallone fought against studio pressure to turn Rambo into a shallow action hero in the first film. Originally, First Blood had a far more violent ending where Rambo dies by suicide at the hands of Colonel Troutman. Stallone insisted that Rambo must live, arguing that killing him would destroy the emotional message of the film. This decision allowed the entire franchise to exist and transformed Rambo into a symbol of survival instead of tragic defeat. As the franchise evolved through the 1980s, Rambo became more of a political weapon in pop culture. Rambo, First Blood Part 2, and Rambo 3 reflected Cold War tensions. Rambo went from a misunderstood veteran to a nearly mythological warrior fighting America's enemies abroad. These films cemented Rambo as a global action icon but also attracted criticism for their portrayal of violence and politics. Despite this, they were massive box office successes and turned the franchise into one of the most lucrative action brands of the era. By the time Rambo, 2008, was released, the franchise returned to a more brutal and grounded tone. Set in Burma, it presented some of the most graphic violence ever seen in a mainstream Hollywood action film. This version of Rambo was no longer patriotic propaganda but a grim depiction of what a man shaped entirely by violence looks like when placed back into chaos. Stallone himself described this Rambo as a force of nature rather than a man. This tone continued into Last Blood, which was even darker and more brutal in its portrayal of vengeance and human cruelty. The public reception of Rambo, Last Blood was deeply divided. Some audiences praised it for its raw emotion, practical action, and closure to Rambo's story. Others criticized it for excessive violence, thin storytelling, and its portrayal of Mexico and cartel culture. Several critics argued that the film lacked the emotional complexity of the earlier entries and relied too heavily on shock value. Despite critical controversy, the film performed solidly at the box office, proving that the Rambo name still carried significant commercial power. The soundtrack and musical identity of Rambo also played a major role in shaping its emotional impact. Jerry Goldsmith's iconic score from the original films became inseparable from the character. The main theme, with its slow, melancholic melody rising into heroic resolve, perfectly captured the emotional duality of Rambo as both victim and warrior. In Last Blood, the score referenced earlier themes while incorporating darker, more minimal compositions to reflect Rambo's aging and emotional exhaustion. The cultural impact of Rambo spread far beyond cinema into video games, toys, fashion, political symbolism, and military identity. The red headband became an internationally recognized symbol of resistance and survival. Rambo was used in propaganda, parodies, and even real-world political imagery in multiple countries. In South Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and Latin America, the character achieved a level of popularity comparable to superheroes. This global recognition is a major reason why rumors of Rambo 6 continue to generate so much attention despite lacking official confirmation. Merchandising for Rambo has included action figures, comic books, arcade games, console games, clothing lines, and replica weapons. In the 1980s, Rambo merchandise became a significant part of Western pop culture exported worldwide. Many people who never even saw all the films still recognize the character instantly, which is extremely rare in cinema history. The idea of continuing the franchise without Stallone is controversial among fans. On one hand, there is understanding that the character of John Rambo could live on through reinterpretation and prequels. On the other hand, many fans believe that Stallone is Rambo and that the character cannot exist authentically without him. This division is one of the biggest challenges facing the upcoming prequel, John Rambo. The success or failure of this project will largely determine whether the franchise can survive beyond Stallone's legacy. From a business perspective, the logic behind rebooting Rambo as a prequel is straightforward. Franchises generate more value when they can continue for multiple decades with new actors and modern audiences. Younger viewers who did not grow up with Stallone may connect more easily with a new interpretation of Rambo. Studios see this as an opportunity to reintroduce the character with contemporary storytelling, advanced visual effects, and modern political themes. The prequel's Vietnam War setting offers vast storytelling possibilities. The Vietnam War remains one of the most psychologically complex and controversial conflicts in American history. A young Rambo experiencing his first exposure to violence, betrayal, and loss could provide a deeply emotional character study. It also allows filmmakers to show the transformation of an innocent recruit into a hardened killing machine. If done with sensitivity and realism, the prequel has the potential to rival the emotional depth of First Blood. Another important factor in the future of the franchise is how modern audiences respond to depictions of extreme violence. Rambo has always been violent, but contemporary audiences are more sensitive to issues of representation, realism, and moral responsibility. Any future Rambo project will need to balance brutal action with meaningful character development to remain socially acceptable and critically respected. The concept of passing the torch has also been discussed heavily in fan circles. Some rumors suggest that if a sequel were ever made, Rambo might serve as a mentor figure to a younger warrior, similar to what has been done in other franchises. This would allow Stallone to appear in a limited role without performing extreme physical action. However, Stallone himself has expressed mixed feelings about this idea, indicating that Rambo's story is deeply personal and not easily transferable. The psychological damage portrayed in the Rambo series is one of its most underrated aspects. From nightmares and emotional breakdowns to isolation and survivor's guilt, Rambo is consistently depicted as a man who cannot escape his past. Unlike traditional action heroes who enjoy their victories, Rambo suffers from every life he takes and every war he survives. This tragic dimension separates Rambo from most action characters and gives the series its lasting emotional power. The brutality in the films is not meant to glorify violence but to show its consequences. Even when Rambo defeats his enemies, he does not celebrate. Instead, he retreats further into solitude. This is particularly evident in Last Blood, where the final massacre does not bring him peace. Instead, the ending emphasizes that the cost of violence is permanent and irreversible. From a cinematic craft perspective, the Rambo films have influenced the entire action genre. Many modern action movies borrow from Rambo's visual language, structure, and pacing. The lone warrior against overwhelming odds, the use of traps, guerrilla tactics, and survival instincts have become standard action tropes largely because of Rambo's influence. The franchise has also shaped how war veterans are portrayed in film. Before Rambo, many movies either ignored the psychological impact of war or oversimplified it. Rambo forced audiences to confront the reality of post-traumatic stress disorder at a time when the term was not widely discussed. This social impact is one of the most important contributions of the series to cinema history. As the entertainment industry moves further into the era of streaming platforms, there is also speculation about whether Rambo could return as a television series rather than a film. A series could explore Rambo's early years in far greater depth than a 2-hour movie ever could. However, no such project has been officially announced. In summary, the idea of Rambo 6 exists more as a cultural desire than as a real film project. The legacy of Rambo is so powerful that people naturally expect the story to continue. But the reality is that the official storyline of John Rambo, as portrayed by Sylvester Stallone, effectively ended with Rambo: Last Blood. The future of the franchise now depends entirely on whether the prequel, John Rambo, can capture the emotional and psychological essence that made the original character so legendary. When examining the full journey of the Rambo character from a historical and cinematic perspective, it becomes clear that John Rambo is not merely an action hero but a symbolic reflection of the changing political and cultural landscape of the Western world over 4 decades. Each era of the franchise mirrors the fears, conflicts, and ideologies of its time. In the early 1980s, America was still struggling with the emotional scars of the Vietnam War. First Blood captured the anger, isolation, and psychological instability of returning veterans who felt betrayed by their government and abandoned by society. Rambo was not presented as a villain or a hero but as a man pushed beyond his breaking point. This realism shocked audiences and critics alike because it stripped away the romanticism of war and replaced it with emotional devastation. As American foreign policy shifted in tone during the Reagan era, the sequels transformed Rambo into a symbol of military redemption. Rambo: First Blood Part 2 turned the character into a near-mythical warrior returning to Vietnam to rescue forgotten prisoners of war. This narrative aligned closely with Cold War patriotism, portraying Rambo as the embodiment of American strength and moral certainty. While this version of the character was wildly popular with mass audiences, critics argued that it simplified complex political realities into a black-and-white moral framework. Regardless of criticism, the film became a massive commercial success and solidified Rambo as a global action icon. Rambo 3 continued this Cold War narrative by placing Rambo in Afghanistan where he fought alongside Afghan resistance fighters against Soviet forces. At the time of its release, the geopolitical context made the story seem straightforward. However, decades later, the same film became controversial due to changing political realities in the region. This demonstrates how deeply the Rambo franchise is intertwined with real-world politics, making it a living historical artifact as much as a work of entertainment. After a long 20-year gap, the franchise returned with Rambo in 2008, marking a dramatic tonal shift. The world had changed, and so had how violence was depicted in cinema. This installment abandoned patriotism and political ideology almost entirely, focusing instead on raw survival and moral ambiguity. Set in Burma during a brutal civil conflict, the film portrayed violence with shocking realism. It no longer sought to justify Rambo's actions politically but instead presented violence as a horrifying necessity in an unforgiving world. This version of Rambo was quieter, colder, and far more emotionally withdrawn than his earlier incarnations. Rambo: Last Blood carried this realism even further, grounding the story in personal tragedy rather than geopolitical conflict. The enemy was no longer a foreign army or oppressive regime but a criminal cartel operating in the shadows of modern society. This shift reflected contemporary fears about organized crime, human trafficking, and border violence. The film stripped away the spectacle of large-scale warfare and replaced it with intimate, personal brutality. Rambo was no longer saving nations, he was seeking revenge for a family he failed to protect. The emotional core of Last Blood centers on loss, guilt, and the illusion of peace. At the beginning of the film, Rambo appears to have found some sense of stability on his ranch. He works, eats, sleeps, and interacts with a surrogate family. However, this peaceful exterior is fragile and temporary. The underground tunnels beneath his ranch symbolize the unresolved trauma buried within him. When tragedy strikes, those tunnels become instruments of war, proving that Rambo never truly left the battlefield. His mind remained trapped in combat mode, waiting for an excuse to return. This psychological consistency across the franchise is one of its greatest strengths. Despite dramatic shifts in tone, politics, and scale, Rambo's internal struggle remains remarkably constant. He is always a man torn between his desire for peace and his inability to exist in a world without violence. This inner conflict is what gives emotional weight to the extreme action sequences. Without this emotional foundation, Rambo would collapse into shallow spectacle. Instead, it remains a tragic character study disguised as an action franchise. The controversy surrounding the violence in the Rambo films has followed the franchise throughout its history. Critics have often accused the series of glorifying brutality. Supporters argue that Rambo exposes the horrors of violence rather than celebrating them. This debate reached its peak with the releases of the 2008 film and Last Blood, both of which included scenes of extreme gore rarely seen in mainstream cinema. These scenes were deliberately designed to be uncomfortable for the viewer. Stallone himself stated that he wanted the audience to feel the true cost of violence rather than consume it as entertainment. The international reception of the franchise has always been complex. In many countries, Rambo is viewed as a symbol of resistance and strength rather than American propaganda. In parts of Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East, the character was embraced as a warrior fighting oppression rather than a representative of U.S. military power. This global reinterpretation of Rambo is one of the reasons the franchise achieved such enduring popularity beyond America. In South Asia in particular, Rambo achieved near-mythical status. Bootleg copies of the film circulated widely, and local action cinema was heavily influenced by Rambo's lone warrior archetype. Many local film industries adopted the template of a solitary hero taking revenge against overwhelming odds, reflecting the cultural resonance of the Rambo image. The endurance of Rambo in popular memory is also tied to the performance of Sylvester Stallone. His physical transformation, minimalist dialogue, and emotional restraint created a unique screen presence. Unlike many action stars who rely heavily on witty dialogue, Stallone's Rambo communicates more through silence and expression than speech. His haunted eyes, rigid posture, and sudden explosive movements communicate a lifetime of trauma without the need for long monologues. This silent intensity became one of the defining traits of the character. Stallone's personal life and career are also closely connected to the evolution of Rambo. Like Rambo, Stallone experienced professional rejection, struggle, and reinvention. This parallel added authenticity to his portrayal. By the time of Last Blood, both Stallone and Rambo were aging warriors looking back at lives shaped by hardship. This real-life connection between actor and character added an extra layer of emotional resonance to the final film. From a technical filmmaking standpoint, the Rambo series reflects the evolution of action cinema itself. The earlier films relied on practical effects, real explosions, and physical stunts performed with minimal safety nets. The later films incorporated digital effects but still emphasized practical stunts whenever possible. This commitment to physical realism contributed to the visceral impact of the action. Cinematography in the franchise is deliberately harsh and uncompromising. The use of natural lighting, gritty color palettes, and handheld camera work creates a documentary-like realism in many scenes. This visual style reinforces the sense that the viewer is witnessing real suffering rather than stylized fantasy. Sound design also plays a crucial role. Gunshots are deafening, explosions feel physically impactful, and moments of silence are used strategically to build tension. The contrast between silence and sudden chaos mirrors Rambo's internal psychological state, oscillating between calm and overwhelming violence. The question of whether Rambo should continue as a franchise remains one of the most debated topics among fans and critics. On one side is the argument that some stories should end with dignity and closure. On the other is the belief that Rambo represents an archetype that can be reinvented for every generation. The announcement of the prequel, John Rambo, represents a compromise between these two views. It allows the character to live on without disturbing the emotional finality of Stallone's farewell. Casting a new actor as Rambo will be one of the most critical decisions in the franchise's history. The actor must not only match the physical demands of the role but also capture the emotional depth that defines the character. Any failure in this area could result in the prequel being perceived as a hollow imitation rather than a meaningful extension of the legacy. If successful, the prequel could open the door to an entirely new generation of Rambo films exploring different stages of his early military career. If it fails, it may permanently close the door on the franchise's future. This makes the upcoming project one of the most high-stakes reboots in modern action cinema. The modern film industry's reliance on established intellectual property makes Rambo an extremely valuable asset. Studios prefer familiar brands because they carry built-in audiences and reduced financial risk. However, this commercial logic must be balanced with creative integrity to avoid damaging the character's legacy. The idea of Rambo 6 as a direct sequel remains unlikely not only because of Stallone's age but also because Last Blood was crafted as a definitive ending. The final images of the film, which suggest reflection rather than triumph, reinforce the idea of finality. Reopening that narrative would risk undermining its emotional impact. The continued popularity of Rambo on digital streaming platforms has introduced the franchise to younger viewers who did not grow up during its original theatrical run. This new audience experiences the films differently, often viewing them as historical and psychological artifacts rather than contemporary entertainment. This shift in audience perception will inevitably influence how future Rambo projects are developed and marketed. The myth of Rambo has now transcended cinema and become part of global folklore. The name Rambo itself has entered everyday language as a synonym for extreme toughness and relentless persistence. Few fictional characters achieve this level of cultural penetration. In the end, Rambo is not just a soldier, not just a fighter, and not just a violent man. He is a living embodiment of the cost of war, the pain of survival, and the tragedy of a man who can never truly return to normal life. Whether through sequels, prequels, or reinterpretations, this core truth must remain intact for any future Rambo project to succeed. The mythology of John Rambo has continued to evolve even outside official studio productions, largely because the character resonates with a universal human struggle, the inability to escape one's past. Few action heroes are defined not by victory but by loss. Rambo survives every war, every battle, and every confrontation, yet he never truly wins. His survival is not a reward but a burden. This tragic structure places Rambo closer to the heroes of classical tragedy than to modern fictional superheroes. Like ancient warriors, Rambo is cursed to live with the memory of everything he has destroyed. This tragic identity is the reason many fans resist the idea of a lighthearted or commercially softened reboot. The power of Rambo lies precisely in its darkness. Any future continuation that turns Rambo into a purely entertaining spectacle without psychological weight would betray the soul of the franchise. This is why the prequel, John Rambo, carries such enormous creative responsibility. It must respect not only the physical side of the character but the emotional scars that define him. The character's silence is one of its most powerful storytelling devices. Throughout the franchise, Rambo speaks far less than most protagonists. His words are deliberate, often restrained, and usually loaded with emotional history. When he finally speaks at length, as he does in emotional breakdown scenes, the impact is overwhelming. These rare moments of vulnerability reveal the full depth of his suffering and make the violence that follows feel like a desperate release rather than heroism. Rambo's relationship with authority is another consistent thematic thread. From the sheriff in First Blood to military commanders in later films, Rambo is repeatedly betrayed or misunderstood by institutions that claim to represent order and justice. This repeated conflict suggests a deep philosophical message: war creates individuals who no longer fit into the structures of peace. Rambo is too violent for civilian life and too independent for military obedience. He exists permanently in between, belonging nowhere. This sense of isolation defines not only Rambo's personal life but also the visual language of the films. He is frequently framed alone against vast natural landscapes or abandoned environments. Forests, mountains, deserts, rivers, jungles, and ruined structures become extensions of his internal loneliness. Even in crowd scenes, the camera often isolates him from others through framing and lighting. This reinforced loneliness is one of the reasons audiences feel sympathy for him despite his extreme actions. The use of geography in the Rambo films also reflects shifting global anxieties. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Burma, and the U.S. Mexico border are not randomly chosen locations. Each represents a specific political and cultural fear at the time of production. Vietnam symbolized unresolved national trauma. Afghanistan symbolized Cold War proxy conflict. Burma represented forgotten humanitarian disasters. The U.S. Mexico border symbolized modern crime, trafficking, and identity conflict. Rambo's movement across these spaces mirrors the evolving fears of global society. Behind every Rambo film lies a complex industrial machine involving multinational financing, insurance negotiations, censorship boards, marketing departments, and global distribution networks. The violence that defines the franchise often created significant challenges during production and release. Many countries demanded cuts or outright banned certain versions of the films. Nevertheless, the demand for Rambo remained strong, often increasing precisely because of its controversial reputation. The franchise also played a major role in shaping the image of the one-man army archetype. Before Rambo, action heroes usually operated within teams or law enforcement systems. Rambo established the concept of a single warrior capable of destroying entire armies through strategy, endurance, and willpower. This template later influenced countless films and even video game design, where lone protagonists dominate hostile environments through survival tactics. In video games especially, the Rambo influence is massive. Stealth mechanics, ambush tactics, survival resource management, and guerrilla-style combat all draw heavily from the cinematic language introduced by Rambo. Even when not explicitly referenced, the DNA of Rambo can be felt across multiple gaming franchises. The emotional minimalism of Rambo also challenged a common Hollywood practice of over-explaining characters through dialogue. Instead of extensive exposition, the franchise trusted the audience to interpret Rambo's pain through behavior, posture, silence, and violence. This form of visual storytelling requires confidence from filmmakers and intelligence from viewers. It is one of the reasons Rambo feels more authentic than many later action characters who rely heavily on verbal explanation. The aging of Rambo across decades is another unique element rarely explored with such honesty in action franchises. Whereas many comic book-style heroes remain permanently youthful, Rambo visibly ages, weakens, and slows down. His injuries accumulate. His fatigue becomes visible. His desperation grows more intense. This aging process mirrors the real human experience and gives the franchise an emotional gravity rarely seen in long-running action series. In Last Blood, this aging reaches its most extreme expression. Rambo is no longer fighting to prove strength or loyalty to a cause. He is fighting because everything he attempted to protect has been destroyed. The motivation is no longer ideological but purely emotional. Revenge is not a mission given by an authority figure, it is a personal scream against the universe. This shift is what makes Last Blood feel less like a war movie and more like a revenge tragedy. The film's controversial portrayal of cartel violence sparked international debate. Critics accused the movie of reinforcing stereotypes, while supporters argued it was reflecting real-world brutality without romanticism. This controversy once again highlighted how Rambo films often sit at the intersection of entertainment and political discourse. Even when not intended as political statements, they become part of political conversation because of their subject matter and imagery. The marketing of Rambo films has always leaned heavily on visual iconography rather than narrative complexity. Tattoos, knives, red headbands, bows, and explosive weapons became symbols instantly recognizable across cultures. This visual branding made Rambo one of the most marketable action characters in history. Even people unfamiliar with the detailed storylines can identify Rambo purely through silhouette and pose. The bow and arrow in particular became a signature weapon that separated Rambo from other gun-heavy action heroes. It symbolized primitive survival skill rather than modern technology, reinforcing the idea that Rambo belongs more to nature than to civilization. This weapon choice reinforced the idea that he is a hunter rather than a soldier of modern systems. The knife likewise became a psychological extension of Rambo's body. It is not merely a weapon but a survival tool, a symbol of self-reliance. Many scenes emphasize the knife before action begins, almost ritualistically, suggesting that Rambo prepares for battle as one would prepare for a sacred task. This ritualistic treatment of violence adds to the mythic quality of the character. Another crucial component of Rambo's identity is his relationship with Colonel Troutman, his former commander and mentor. Troutman represents the military system that created Rambo but also the only authority figure who truly understands him. Their relationship is not based on traditional affection but on mutual recognition of shared trauma and responsibility. Troutman understands that he played a role in turning Rambo into a weapon and carries guilt for unleashing him into a world unprepared to deal with his existence. The decline of Troutman's presence in later films symbolizes Rambo's complete emotional isolation. As his last link to his military identity fades, Rambo becomes increasingly detached from all forms of structured life. This detachment is most visible in Last Blood, where he lives almost like a ghost, disconnected from social systems, existing only out of habit rather than purpose. The audience's emotional connection to Rambo is built on sympathy rather than admiration. Viewers rarely envy Rambo's life. Instead, they pity it. His strength is presented as a curse. He cannot live freely because his skills make him a threat and a target. This tragic framing is why even extreme acts of violence do not convert him into a villain in the moral imagination of the audience. The unconfirmed rumors of Rambo 6 persist largely because audiences struggle to accept finality with such a powerful character. In popular mythology, heroes rarely die emotionally, they are resurrected, rebooted, and reimagined endlessly. The idea that Rambo's story might truly be finished conflicts with the modern entertainment culture of eternal franchises. Yet part of what makes Rambo unique is precisely the idea that his story does end in exhaustion rather than triumph. If a sixth film were ever officially produced as a sequel, it would face the impossible task of justifying why a man who has lost everything still finds a reason to fight. Any such justification would need to be extraordinarily powerful to avoid feeling forced or cynical. This narrative challenge is one of the strongest reasons studios have shifted toward a prequel rather than a continuation. The prequel offers narrative freedom without undermining the emotional logic of the original ending. By exploring Rambo's youth, the filmmakers can rediscover the innocence that made his fall into violence tragic in the first place. This innocence is something that no sequel could ever retrieve. Once lost, it defines Rambo forever. The challenge for the prequel will be resisting the temptation to turn young Rambo into a typical Hollywood action hero. If he is portrayed as fearless, dominant, and unstoppable from the beginning, the emotional arc that defines his later life will collapse. Rambo must begin as a human being with vulnerability, doubt, and hope. Only then can his eventual transformation carry meaningful emotional weight. The legacy of Rambo is also tied to broader questions about how cinema processes trauma. Rambo externalizes psychological pain through physical conflict. He fights not only enemies but memories. Each enemy becomes a symbol of a past he cannot erase. This symbolic use of violence is what elevates the franchise beyond simple action spectacle. At a deeper level, Rambo represents the human desire to master overwhelming suffering through action. When life becomes unbearable, Rambo does not collapse inward, he explodes outward. This reaction is extreme and destructive, but it is also deeply human. This is why audiences across cultures, languages, and political systems continue to connect with him. The endurance of the Rambo myth suggests that societies across the world continue to struggle with the psychological effects of violence, war, and injustice. As long as these struggles exist, there will be space for characters like Rambo to reflect them in exaggerated, symbolic form. The philosophical resonance of John Rambo as a tragic anti-hero is one of the most compelling aspects of the franchise. Unlike traditional heroes, Rambo is not defined by moral clarity or ethical perfection. He operates in the gray zones of morality, where survival, vengeance, and self-preservation often override conventional notions of right and wrong. This ambiguity allows the character to speak to a wide audience, as many viewers can empathize with feelings of helplessness, alienation, and injustice. He becomes an avatar for anyone who has faced insurmountable odds in a world that feels indifferent or hostile. The intensity of his isolation, combined with the relentlessness of his actions, transforms him from a mere soldier into a symbol of human endurance under extreme conditions. From a cinematic standpoint, Rambo has also influenced how anti-heroes are presented in action cinema. Before Rambo, action protagonists were often morally unambiguous. They were either good or evil, with limited room for psychological complexity. Rambo changed this by combining extraordinary physical prowess with profound vulnerability. Audiences witness both his terrifying capacity for violence and the emotional fragility beneath the surface. This duality creates tension and allows for storytelling that extends beyond spectacle, enabling discussions about trauma, alienation, and the psychological cost of war. The franchise's reception over decades illustrates the shifting standards of both critical and popular taste. The early films, particularly First Blood, were praised for their character-driven storytelling and psychological realism, while sequels such as First Blood Part 2 and Rambo 3 were critiqued for their escalating spectacle and political overtones. In contrast, the later films of the 2000s and 2010s were often polarizing. Some appreciated their raw portrayal of violence and emotional closure, while others found the content excessive and morally troubling. This divergence underscores a broader point about action cinema. Audiences can be drawn simultaneously to the thrill of violence and repelled by its ethical implications. Rambo occupies this tension uniquely because the narrative forces viewers to confront the human cost of every confrontation. Box office performance across regions demonstrates Rambo's global appeal and cultural impact. The early 1980s films performed strongly in North America and Europe, while subsequent sequels extended the franchise's reach to Asia and Latin America. In countries like India, Brazil, and the Philippines, Rambo became an icon of resilience and anti-oppression. Bootleg copies of the films circulated widely, further cementing the character's mythical status. Even where the films were censored or banned due to graphic content, the intrigue around them often increased, contributing to the character's legendary reputation. Modern streaming platforms have introduced Rambo to younger audiences, who may not have experienced theatrical releases, ensuring that the character continues to influence popular culture globally. Censorship and public controversy surrounding the franchise provide an additional lens through which to understand its impact. Some films faced cuts or bans in various countries due to depictions of extreme violence, political content, or graphic imagery. Yet, rather than diminishing the franchise, these controversies often amplified Rambo's appeal, creating a sense of danger and forbidden intensity around the character. The notoriety of the films contributed to their marketing success, demonstrating the intricate relationship between societal norms, cinematic expression, and public appetite for high-stakes storytelling. The franchise's influence extends beyond cinema and into other media, including television, video games, and comic books. Many contemporary action games adopt mechanics reminiscent of Rambo's combat style, emphasizing stealth, guerrilla tactics, and environmental manipulation. These gaming adaptations underscore how Rambo's survivalist approach has permeated interactive media, influencing storytelling techniques and gameplay design. Comic books and graphic novels have also explored alternative storylines, often pushing the narrative boundaries further than the films themselves, emphasizing Rambo's legendary status as a character who can be reinterpreted in multiple cultural contexts. Comparisons between Rambo and other action icons, such as the Terminator, Die Hard's John McClane, or Stallone's Rocky Balboa, reveal both similarities and contrasts. Rambo shares with these characters an extraordinary capacity to endure physical and emotional hardship, but unlike McClane or Rocky, Rambo is defined by trauma as much as heroism. While Rocky overcomes adversity through perseverance and triumph, and McClane navigates high-stakes threats with humor and resilience, Rambo's victories are bittersweet and often come at immense personal cost. This distinction highlights why Rambo's narrative is often interpreted as a modern tragedy, rather than a traditional action fantasy. The evolution of action choreography in Rambo films illustrates how the franchise has shaped industry standards. Early entries relied on practical stunts, hand-to-hand combat, and careful framing to create tension and realism. As the series progressed, directors increasingly incorporated complex set pieces, booby traps, and inventive survival strategies to maintain audience engagement. Despite advances in visual effects, the commitment to physical authenticity remains central to the franchise's identity. This emphasis on grounded action helps maintain the believability of Rambo as a solitary, highly skilled combatant capable of overcoming overwhelming odds. Soundtrack composition is another cornerstone of the Rambo mythos. Jerry Goldsmith's original score established themes of isolation, heroism, and sorrow, weaving together music that underscores Rambo's emotional state at every moment. Subsequent films have revisited and expanded these musical motifs, reflecting the character's aging and evolving psychological profile. In Last Blood, the score emphasizes somber reflection, melancholy, and sudden bursts of intensity that mirror the abrupt, violent nature of Rambo's confrontations. Music in the franchise operates not merely as background accompaniment but as an active narrative force, enhancing both tension and emotional resonance. The prequel, John Rambo, represents an opportunity to explore previously untold aspects of the character's psychological development. By focusing on Rambo's early years in the military and his initial exposure to the traumas of war, the film promises to contextualize the man he becomes in later entries. Early reports suggest that the narrative will delve into his internal conflicts, his relationships with comrades, and the formative experiences that shape his moral code and survival instincts. If executed effectively, this prequel could deepen the franchise's psychological complexity while attracting a younger audience unfamiliar with the original films. In terms of narrative structure, Rambo films consistently employ a combination of linear storytelling and episodic survival sequences. This structure allows for moments of intense character development interspersed with high-stakes action, maintaining both emotional engagement and adrenaline-fueled spectacle. The tension between character introspection and visceral confrontation is central to the franchise's enduring appeal. It enables audiences to empathize with Rambo while simultaneously being captivated by the ingenuity, courage, and brutality of his actions. Global merchandising and brand extension have also played a crucial role in sustaining the Rambo legacy. Beyond films, the franchise has inspired action figures, role-playing games, apparel, and collectibles. This merchandising serves not only as a commercial enterprise but as a method of cultural reinforcement, embedding Rambo's image into everyday life and ensuring its presence across multiple generations. The recognizable iconography, red headband, bow and arrow, combat knife, has become almost universally symbolic of survival, resilience, and uncompromising toughness. The political dimensions of Rambo remain significant. While early films directly engaged with Cold War anxieties and Vietnam War trauma, later installments have reflected contemporary global concerns, such as human trafficking, cartel violence, and the failure of governmental institutions to protect vulnerable populations. These themes resonate across different societies, contributing to the franchise's global relevance and its continued discussion in scholarly and cinematic circles. Finally, the endurance of Rambo demonstrates the delicate balance between closure and perpetuation in long-running franchises. While Rambo, Last Blood provided narrative closure for Sylvester Stallone's version of the character, the prequel offers a chance to expand the mythology without undermining the emotional weight of the original conclusion. This strategy respects both the franchise's history and its potential future, ensuring that Rambo remains a compelling figure for decades to come. Analyzing Rambo's global box office performance reveals the character's extraordinary international appeal. Each film has generated audiences across continents, demonstrating the universality of its themes of survival, loss, and resilience. The original, First Blood, achieved critical and commercial success in North America and Europe, introducing audiences to Rambo's psychological depth and skill as a soldier. Rambo, First Blood Part 2, broke records internationally, with especially strong performance in Western Europe and Latin America, where the image of a lone warrior taking on insurmountable odds resonated with audiences facing their own political and social anxieties. Asia, particularly countries such as India and the Philippines, embraced Rambo as an archetype of unstoppable determination, and bootleg distribution helped to cement the character's mythical status among younger generations who had no access to theaters. By the time of Rambo 3, international sales accounted for a significant portion of overall revenue, reflecting the franchise's capacity to transcend language and culture through its visual storytelling and universally understood themes of struggle and vengeance. Rambo, 2008, and Rambo, Last Blood continued this trend despite controversies over violence and depiction of certain groups. In Europe, Last Blood performed well, particularly in countries with strong action movie markets, while in Latin America and parts of Asia, it attracted younger audiences discovering Rambo for the first time through streaming services or DVD releases. Box office data indicates that while domestic U.S. returns were modest compared to earlier decades, the global revenue was sufficient to maintain Rambo's relevance and validate future projects, including the upcoming prequel. The international performance demonstrates that Rambo's appeal does not rest solely on American cultural context but on the universal resonance of his struggles against oppression, loss, and violence. Critical reception has always varied depending on the cultural lens through which the films are viewed. In the United States, critics often focused on political interpretation, cinematic style, and ethical questions surrounding violence. European critics tended to emphasize psychological complexity and narrative depth, while audiences in Asia and Latin America were drawn primarily to action spectacle and heroic endurance. Across decades, critics have recognized Rambo as both a symbol of trauma and a reflection of shifting societal fears. Despite mixed reviews, the franchise's longevity proves that Rambo's cultural and emotional impact outweighs critical judgment in sustaining audience engagement. Behind the scenes, Stallone's influence has been enormous. From co-writing the original script of First Blood to consulting extensively on set during later films, Stallone ensured that Rambo remained more than a simple action hero. His insistence on psychological realism, emotional stakes, and practical stunts has defined the franchise's unique aesthetic. Stallone often personally choreographed action sequences, insisted on realistic military tactics, and advocated for narrative cohesion across films. His creative authority ensured that Rambo's evolution remained consistent, emotionally grounded, and psychologically compelling. Even in discussions about Rambo 6 or potential continuations, Stallone's voice carries weight among both fans and producers, underlining his centrality to the character's authenticity. The future of the Rambo franchise in contemporary cinema raises questions about adaptation, reinvention, and generational relevance. Modern audiences are accustomed to fast-paced action, sophisticated visual effects, and complex moral landscapes. Any continuation must navigate these expectations while retaining the emotional and thematic core that defines Rambo. This includes portraying his psychological scars, maintaining a realistic depiction of violence, and respecting the continuity established by Stallone's performances. The prequel, focusing on Rambo's early life, allows filmmakers to explore this origin story without compromising the established closure of Last Blood, presenting opportunities for both narrative expansion and modernized storytelling. The comparison between Rambo and contemporary action archetypes further highlights the character's distinct place in cinematic history. Unlike the invincible, morally unambiguous heroes of other franchises, Rambo is a character defined by trauma and emotional complexity. Where superheroes often celebrate their victories, Rambo's triumphs are marked by personal loss and moral ambiguity. Where other action protagonists rely on humor, charisma, or gadgetry, Rambo relies on survival instinct, adaptability, and strategic intelligence honed by combat experience. These differences allow the franchise to maintain a level of gravitas uncommon in mainstream action cinema, reinforcing its classification as a cultural and psychological study as much as an entertainment product. The legacy of Rambo extends to academic and cultural analysis. Scholars have examined the franchise in relation to post-Vietnam War American cinema, trauma theory, and representations of masculinity. The character embodies a particular model of hypermasculine survival shaped by societal rejection, making him a subject of ongoing discussion in film studies and cultural criticism. Articles, essays, and dissertations have explored how Rambo's narrative structure, physicality, and moral positioning comment on contemporary anxieties about war, violence, and alienation. In this sense, Rambo transcends entertainment, functioning as a case study in the psychological and socio-political dimensions of action cinema. Merchandising and ancillary products have extended Rambo's influence into everyday culture. Action figures, apparel, replica weapons, and video games have allowed fans to interact with the character beyond the cinematic experience. This level of brand integration, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s, cemented Rambo as a global icon. The prequel promises to reinvigorate merchandising potential, introducing a younger version of the character for a new generation, and expanding opportunities for brand synergy in both media and consumer products. The prequel's narrative potential lies in exploring Rambo's formative experiences. By examining his early military training, relationships with fellow soldiers, and first encounters with battlefield trauma, the film can illuminate how the character's survival instincts and moral framework were developed. This offers a chance to depict Rambo's psychological evolution in a nuanced way, emphasizing that his later actions are rooted in experiences rather than innate violence. The prequel thus becomes not only a storytelling opportunity but a means to deepen understanding of a character who has fascinated audiences for decades. Cinematography, sound design, and production values in Rambo films have always contributed significantly to their impact. The use of natural lighting, immersive soundscapes, and practical effects ensures that action sequences feel immediate and grounded. Music, particularly the recurring motifs composed by Jerry Goldsmith and adapted in later installments, reinforces the emotional and psychological stakes. The interplay between visual realism, auditory tension, and narrative pacing has been critical in shaping the franchise's distinctive tone, combining high-intensity action with contemplative, emotionally resonant moments. In terms of production challenges, the Rambo franchise has often navigated complex logistical and political landscapes. International filming locations, such as Vietnam-inspired sets, Burmese jungles, and Mexican border towns, required extensive coordination with local governments, safety crews, and production designers. The realistic depiction of violence, while essential to narrative authenticity, also posed challenges in stunt coordination, actor safety, and special effects execution. Despite these complexities, the franchise consistently delivered sequences that combined realism with dramatic intensity, reinforcing Rambo's reputation as one of the most physically and emotionally demanding action roles in cinematic history. The ethical and philosophical dimensions of Rambo remain central to discussions about the franchise. Unlike traditional heroes who triumph through conventional morality, Rambo operates in morally ambiguous spaces. His acts of violence are framed as necessary survival, yet they carry psychological and social consequences. This tension reflects broader human questions about justice, vengeance, and the consequences of conflict. By dramatizing these themes, Rambo functions as a vehicle for exploring questions of morality, trauma, and human resilience, elevating the franchise above mere entertainment. Rambo's influence on gender and masculinity in popular culture is profound. Unlike many traditional action heroes, his hypermasculinity is intertwined with vulnerability, trauma, and ethical ambiguity. He is physically dominant, capable of extraordinary feats of endurance and combat skill, yet psychologically fragile, deeply affected by his experiences in war. This duality challenges conventional ideas of masculinity in cinema by presenting a character whose strength is inseparable from his suffering. Unlike heroes who are invulnerable or morally unambiguous, Rambo's identity is defined by both his capacity for violence and his emotional scars. The portrayal of his post-traumatic stress, isolation, and difficulty reintegrating into society has been studied in psychology and cultural studies as a representation of the struggles faced by real-life veterans. This integration of physical action with emotional depth is one reason why the franchise resonates with audiences across generations and cultures. The prequel, John Rambo, offers a unique opportunity to explore these themes from a new perspective. By depicting the character's early military experiences and initial encounters with trauma, the film can illustrate the process by which a psychologically fragile young soldier becomes a hardened warrior. This narrative approach allows audiences to witness the development of his moral code, survival instincts, and internalized loneliness. It also provides a context for the character's later actions, demonstrating that his extraordinary capabilities are the result of years of struggle, training, and adaptation, rather than inherent heroism. The prequel thus promises to deepen the psychological complexity of Rambo while making his story accessible to new audiences who may not have experienced the original films. Fan culture surrounding Rambo has been a critical factor in sustaining the franchise. From the 1980s to today, the character has inspired devoted communities of enthusiasts, cosplayers, collectors, and gamers. Online forums, fan sites, and social media platforms frequently discuss Rambo's tactics, analyze his psychological profile, and speculate about hypothetical sequels or alternate storylines. The fascination with Rambo often extends beyond admiration for his action skills. Fans are equally interested in his moral decisions, emotional struggles, and personal code of honor. This level of engagement reflects the franchise's success in creating a character who is psychologically and emotionally compelling, rather than relying solely on spectacle. The portrayal of violence in Rambo has consistently been a source of controversy and discussion. From the visceral jungle combat in First Blood Part 2, to the brutal confrontations in Last Blood, the franchise does not shy away from depicting the consequences of conflict. Violence is shown as messy, painful, and morally complex. Unlike action films where heroism is glamorized, Rambo emphasizes the cost of survival, physical injuries, emotional scars, and moral compromise. This nuanced approach to action has helped the franchise maintain a level of gravitas rare in mainstream cinema and distinguishes it from more conventional hero-centric franchises. Psychologically, Rambo functions as a lens through which audiences can examine human resilience and trauma. His inability to escape his past, coupled with his capacity for extreme survival, mirrors real-world struggles faced by soldiers and civilians in conflict zones. The films explore themes such as post-traumatic stress disorder, moral injury, alienation, and the long-term consequences of violence. These elements contribute to the franchise's enduring relevance and make the character a subject of scholarly analysis in psychology, sociology, and film studies. In addition to psychological depth, Rambo's visual iconography contributes significantly to his mythos. The red headband, combat knife, and bow and arrow have become cultural symbols representing survival, defiance, and resilience. These items are instantly recognizable worldwide and have been incorporated into video games, comic books, and merchandise. Their repeated use across films reinforces the character's identity and provides continuity, allowing audiences to immediately recognize Rambo even in contexts outside the original movies. This visual consistency is crucial in sustaining the franchise's global brand and ensuring that Rambo remains culturally relevant. The prequel's potential to explore Rambo's early life also allows for examination of the formative relationships that shaped him. Comrades, mentors, and adversaries in his youth likely influenced his moral outlook, combat strategies, and psychological development. By delving into these early experiences, the prequel can provide insights into why Rambo behaves as he does in later films, creating a richer, more coherent character arc. This approach not only satisfies narrative continuity but also provides audiences with a deeper understanding of the psychological mechanisms behind heroism, survival, and moral decision-making. Cinematically, Rambo has contributed significantly to the evolution of the action genre. The franchise popularized techniques such as long, tension-filled survival sequences, inventive guerrilla tactics, and realistic combat choreography. Directors and stunt coordinators emphasized practical effects, real stunts, and environmental interaction, creating a sense of authenticity rarely matched in other action films. These innovations have influenced countless subsequent action movies and video games, establishing Rambo as a benchmark for realism, intensity, and strategic ingenuity in entertainment media. Sound design in Rambo films is similarly influential. Gunfire, explosions, and ambient environmental sounds are meticulously crafted to create immersive experiences for viewers. Silence is strategically employed to build tension, highlight vulnerability, or emphasize emotional gravity. The interplay between sound and visual action enhances the narrative, allowing audiences to experience both the psychological and physical stakes of Rambo's confrontations. Music, particularly themes developed by Jerry Goldsmith and adapted in later films, reinforces emotional depth and continuity across the franchise, connecting audiences to Rambo's inner world even amid external chaos. The intersection of political and social commentary with action storytelling is another hallmark of the franchise. Rambo films consistently reflect contemporary concerns, Vietnam-era alienation, Cold War tensions, modern global crime, and the humanitarian consequences of war. This integration of real-world issues into action narratives elevates the films beyond pure spectacle, offering audiences opportunities to engage with political, social, and ethical questions while following thrilling storylines. The prequel, by examining Rambo's early military experiences, has the potential to explore historical and political contexts, highlighting the personal costs of broader conflicts. Merchandising, branding, and cultural influence have also played key roles in the franchise's longevity. From action figures to clothing lines, the Rambo image has permeated global culture, allowing fans to engage with the character beyond cinematic experiences. Cosplay, fan art, and online communities further extend the franchise's reach, creating interactive and participatory forms of engagement. These cultural extensions contribute to the mythic status of Rambo, ensuring that the character remains relevant and influential across multiple media platforms. The prequel and potential sequels must navigate the tension between continuity and innovation. Respecting the psychological, emotional, and thematic integrity of Stallone's Rambo is essential, while introducing new narrative perspectives and modernized action approaches. Successfully balancing these elements will determine whether the franchise continues to resonate with both longtime fans and new audiences. Early indications suggest that the prequel will prioritize character depth, moral complexity, and psychological realism, reflecting lessons learned from decades of audience engagement with Rambo. Comparing Rambo to other iconic action characters underscores his unique position within the genre. Unlike the Terminator, who is a machine with an unambiguous purpose and no internal emotional conflict, Rambo is a profoundly human figure whose greatest battles are internal. Unlike John McClane from Die Hard, whose heroism is often marked by humor, improvisation, and an everyman relatability, Rambo's heroism is defined by isolation, endurance, and moral struggle. While James Bond relies on sophistication, gadgets, and elite training, Rambo relies on raw survival instincts, ingenuity, and his ability to turn any environment into a battlefield. Even compared to Rocky Balboa, who faces personal and physical challenges with emotional resilience and optimism, Rambo's victories are tinged with grief, loss, and the psychological consequences of his violent actions. This positioning as a tragic, morally complex anti-hero distinguishes Rambo from other long-running cinematic icons and helps explain why he remains a subject of fascination decades after his debut. Rambo's symbolic role in global pop culture cannot be overstated. The character represents survival against overwhelming odds, defiance in the face of authority, and the psychological cost of violence. In many regions, Rambo is not simply an American action hero, he is a universal figure of resistance, resourcefulness, and resilience. The red headband, combat knife, and bow and arrow have transcended cinema to become visual shorthand for these ideals, appearing in art, media, cosplay, and even political commentary. This global symbolic presence reinforces the character's mythic status and ensures that Rambo continues to resonate with audiences who may have never seen the original films. The psychological engagement of audiences with Rambo is also significant. Fans are drawn not only to the action sequences but to the character's internal struggles, moral dilemmas, and emotional resilience. Online forums, fan fiction, and social media discussions frequently dissect Rambo's decisions, motivations, and symbolic meaning, reflecting a level of intellectual and emotional investment uncommon for action franchises. The franchise's emphasis on psychological realism and ethical complexity allows viewers to project their own experiences, fears, and aspirations onto the character, creating a deep and lasting connection that goes beyond simple admiration for his combat skills. Fan theories surrounding Rambo often explore alternate timelines, hidden motivations, and hypothetical outcomes of the narrative. These theories demonstrate the richness and flexibility of the franchise, allowing audiences to engage creatively with the character and his universe. From imagined confrontations with historical events to reinterpreted moral dilemmas, these speculative narratives underscore the enduring fascination with Rambo as both a character and a symbolic figure. The continued discussion and theorization within fan communities ensure that the franchise maintains cultural relevance and intellectual engagement across generations. The future trajectory of the franchise is intimately tied to the success of the prequel, John Rambo. By exploring the character's early experiences, the film can provide context for his later psychological and moral evolution. Depicting formative relationships, initial exposure to violence, and first encounters with institutional betrayal will illuminate the forces that shaped Rambo into the figure seen in First Blood and subsequent films. This narrative strategy allows the franchise to expand without undermining the emotional closure established in Last Blood, preserving the integrity of Stallone's final portrayal while creating opportunities for new storytelling. In practical terms, the prequel must also navigate the challenges of casting, action choreography, and audience expectation. Selecting an actor capable of conveying the emotional and psychological depth of young Rambo is critical. Action sequences must balance realism, strategic ingenuity, and physical believability, preserving the franchise's established aesthetic. At the same time, the film must engage modern audiences accustomed to fast-paced narratives and advanced visual effects, creating a delicate balance between fidelity to the original films and contemporary cinematic expectations. The potential for the prequel to explore moral ambiguity is significant. By depicting the character's initial confrontation with ethical dilemmas, survival decisions, and the consequences of violence, the film can highlight the processes by which Rambo develops his personal code. These early experiences, shaped by institutional betrayal, the chaos of war, and personal loss, provide a foundation for understanding the character's actions in later films. The prequel thus has the capacity to deepen audience empathy, enhance narrative coherence, and elevate the franchise beyond traditional action storytelling. Merchandising and cultural branding remain central to the franchise's longevity. New action figures, video games, apparel, and collectibles associated with the prequel can engage younger audiences and create new entry points into the Rambo universe. By maintaining the iconic visual elements, such as the red headband, bow, and knife, the franchise ensures continuity while appealing to contemporary tastes. These commercial strategies, when aligned with narrative integrity, reinforce Rambo's mythic status and global cultural relevance. The prequel also allows for exploration of geopolitical and historical contexts. By situating young Rambo in the realities of the Vietnam War, the film can address broader themes of political betrayal, systemic failure, and the psychological impact of conflict. This integration of historical context with personal narrative provides opportunities for social commentary, elevating the prequel beyond simple action spectacle. By examining the forces that shape the individual within historical crises, the franchise can maintain its tradition of blending thrilling action with deeper thematic resonance. From a technical standpoint, cinematography, sound design, and practical effects will continue to be critical. The franchise's legacy of immersive, realistic action sequences sets a high standard for the prequel. Attention to environmental interaction, tactical combat, and visceral realism ensures that audiences experience the stakes of Rambo's world firsthand. Sound design, from ambient natural environments to explosive combat sequences, must maintain the tension, urgency, and psychological impact that have defined the franchise. Music, revisiting and adapting the iconic motifs established by Jerry Goldsmith, can connect the prequel to the emotional and narrative continuity of earlier films. The franchise's emphasis on psychological realism, moral complexity, and cultural symbolism has ensured that Rambo remains a subject of academic and cultural analysis. Scholars continue to examine the character's portrayal of trauma, masculinity, and resilience, as well as the film's engagement with political and social commentary. This critical attention underscores the intellectual and cultural significance of Rambo, elevating the franchise beyond conventional action entertainment and reinforcing its status as a lasting cinematic phenomenon. The legacy of Rambo, both as a character and a franchise, is a testament to the enduring appeal of psychologically complex storytelling in action cinema. Beyond the spectacle of explosive confrontations, daring escapes, and guerrilla tactics, Rambo embodies the struggle of the individual against forces, both external and internal, that threaten survival, identity, and moral integrity. The franchise's ability to blend visceral action with deeply human emotional and psychological stakes has ensured its continued relevance across decades, cultures, and generations. This duality, action and introspection, is what elevates Rambo above many contemporaries who rely primarily on superficial thrills or unambiguous heroism. The philosophical and ethical dimensions of Rambo extend to questions about justice, vengeance, and the morality of violence. Unlike traditional cinematic heroes who operate within clearly defined moral frameworks, Rambo is constantly navigating ethical ambiguity. His violent actions are often reactive, forced by circumstances beyond his control, yet they carry profound consequences for himself and others. In this way, Rambo can be understood as an exploration of human response to trauma, injustice, and survival. Audiences witness the cost of violence not as entertainment, but as a tangible burden that shapes identity, decision-making, and moral reasoning. Rambo's cultural symbolism is multifaceted. In the United States, he reflects the trauma of the Vietnam War, the alienation of veterans, and the critique of institutional failures. Internationally, he has been interpreted in diverse ways, as a symbol of resistance against oppression, as a model of resilience in the face of adversity, and as a heroic figure capable of transcending social, political, and environmental obstacles. These multiple interpretations contribute to Rambo's mythic status, allowing him to remain relevant even as geopolitical and cultural contexts evolve. The franchise demonstrates how a character rooted in a specific historical moment can achieve timeless resonance when themes of human struggle, loss, and survival are handled with depth and consistency. Fan engagement continues to shape the franchise's cultural impact. Beyond viewership, fans participate through cosplay, artwork, online discussions, and fan fiction, exploring Rambo's motivations, hypothetical scenarios, and moral dilemmas. This participatory culture reinforces the character's enduring relevance, creating communities that analyze, reinterpret, and expand the narrative universe. The franchise's capacity to inspire active engagement distinguishes it from action films that are consumed passively, demonstrating the profound psychological and emotional resonance of Rambo as a cultural figure. Rambo's influence extends into interactive media, particularly video games. Many modern games that emphasize survival, tactical combat, and resourcefulness draw inspiration from the franchise's depiction of a lone warrior navigating hostile environments. The integration of stealth, strategic problem-solving, and environmental manipulation in gaming owes a conceptual debt to Rambo's cinematic approach, where intelligence, adaptability, and psychological resilience are as crucial as physical strength. Through this medium, Rambo's impact reaches audiences in immersive, participatory ways, ensuring the character's relevance in contemporary entertainment landscapes. The prequel, John Rambo, represents the next evolution in the franchise, offering both narrative and thematic opportunities. By examining the character's early military experiences, formative relationships, and first encounters with trauma, the film can illuminate the development of Rambo's moral code, survival instincts, and psychological resilience. This narrative exploration allows for a nuanced portrayal of his transition from a young, vulnerable soldier into the hardened, haunted figure of later films. Importantly, the prequel provides continuity without undermining the emotional closure of Last Blood, preserving Stallone's legacy while expanding the mythology for new audiences. From a cinematic perspective, the prequel must navigate the balance between realism, spectacle, and psychological depth. Action sequences must remain grounded, reflecting tactical intelligence, environmental adaptation, and physical authenticity. Cinematography should emphasize both the intensity of combat and the isolation of the protagonist, maintaining the franchise's signature aesthetic. Sound design and music, building on motifs established by Jerry Goldsmith, should reinforce emotional resonance, tension, and psychological stakes. Attention to these details ensures that the prequel upholds the franchise's established standards while offering fresh narrative insights. The psychological and moral exploration in Rambo films has significant relevance for discussions of trauma, masculinity, and moral ambiguity. By depicting the long-term consequences of violence, the franchise provides a platform for examining how individuals navigate ethical dilemmas under extreme conditions. Rambo's struggles with post-traumatic stress, alienation, and loss mirror real-world experiences of soldiers and civilians affected by war, providing audiences with a lens through which to engage with complex human realities. This depth of psychological engagement distinguishes Rambo from action heroes whose challenges are externalized and whose internal lives are simplified or glossed over. The global reception of the franchise reinforces its universality. While the character originated in an American cultural context, audiences across Europe, Asia, and Latin America have embraced Rambo as a figure of resilience and moral complexity. International interpretations often emphasize his resourcefulness, defiance against oppression, and psychological endurance. Even in contexts where the films faced censorship due to graphic content, the mystique surrounding Rambo often enhanced interest, demonstrating the interplay between cultural regulation, controversy, and mythmaking. Rambo's enduring relevance is further evidenced by his integration into contemporary pop culture. Iconography such as the red headband, combat knife, and bow has become universally recognizable symbols of survival, defiance, and resilience. Beyond films, these symbols appear in merchandising, gaming, cosplay, and media references, ensuring that the franchise maintains visibility and cultural significance across multiple generations and platforms. This consistency of visual and thematic identity reinforces the mythology and symbolic power of the character. The philosophical significance of Rambo lies in his embodiment of human resilience, moral ambiguity, and the psychological cost of violence. He demonstrates that heroism is not defined solely by triumph or survival, but by the capacity to endure suffering, navigate ethical complexity, and confront personal and societal challenges. His narrative invites reflection on the nature of violence, the consequences of trauma, and the struggle for meaning in an unpredictable, often hostile world. These dimensions elevate Rambo beyond conventional action cinema, positioning him as a figure of enduring cultural, psychological, and philosophical importance. Finally, the trajectory of the Rambo franchise illustrates the delicate balance between narrative closure and ongoing relevance. While Last Blood provided emotional and narrative finality for Stallone's portrayal, the prequel allows the mythology to expand without undermining established continuity. By exploring formative experiences, psychological development, and early confrontations with moral dilemmas, the franchise can continue to engage audiences, foster scholarly discussion, and maintain global cultural significance. The combination of action, psychological depth, ethical exploration, and cultural symbolism ensures that Rambo remains an iconic, enduring figure in cinematic history. The legacy of Rambo is deeply intertwined with the evolution of modern action cinema, influencing filmmakers, storytellers, and audiences alike. By blending psychological realism with visceral spectacle, the franchise set a precedent for how action films could simultaneously entertain and engage viewers on an emotional and intellectual level. The depiction of trauma, isolation, and moral ambiguity introduced a complexity rarely seen in the genre prior to Rambo's debut. These elements allowed audiences to connect with the character beyond admiration for physical prowess, inviting reflection on broader human experiences such as suffering, resilience, and ethical decision-making. As a result, Rambo has not only become an icon of action cinema but also a symbol of cultural discourse around war, violence, and the human condition. The prequel, John Rambo, serves as an opportunity to contextualize the psychological and moral framework of the character in a way that complements the original films. By exploring his formative years, military training, and early encounters with institutional betrayal, the prequel can illuminate the origins of Rambo's survival instincts and personal code of ethics. These insights provide audiences with a nuanced understanding of why Rambo behaves as he does in later films, emphasizing that his skills and resilience are forged through experience, hardship, and adaptation rather than innate heroism. The narrative possibilities offered by this prequel are significant, promising to deepen the mythology while introducing the character to a younger generation in a meaningful and psychologically resonant manner. Audience engagement with Rambo extends beyond the films themselves. Fans across the globe have created communities dedicated to analyzing his moral choices, survival tactics, and psychological evolution. Discussions on forums, social media, and fan sites examine hypothetical scenarios, alternate outcomes, and ethical dilemmas, demonstrating the intellectual and emotional investment the character inspires. Fan-created media, including artwork, cosplay, and role-playing games, further extends the franchise's influence, allowing participants to interact with the mythology in ways that reinforce Rambo's status as a cultural and symbolic icon. This participatory culture ensures that Rambo's relevance continues to grow even decades after his introduction. The franchise's approach to violence is central to its enduring impact. Unlike many action films that glamorize conflict, Rambo emphasizes the cost and consequences of violence. Every confrontation carries physical, emotional, and moral weight, reinforcing the notion that survival and heroism come at a price. By portraying violence as both a tool for survival and a source of profound personal burden, the films challenge audiences to consider the ethical implications of conflict and the human cost of combat. This thoughtful approach to action and morality is a hallmark of the franchise, distinguishing it from other long-running cinematic series. Cinematography and production design further reinforce the psychological and thematic depth of the Rambo franchise. The strategic use of lighting, framing, and environmental interaction highlights the character's isolation, resourcefulness, and vulnerability. Natural landscapes, jungles, mountains, deserts, and rivers, are not simply backdrops but extensions of Rambo's internal world, reflecting his solitude and the challenges he faces. Practical effects and authentic stunts maintain realism, creating a tangible sense of danger that immerses audiences in his experiences. Sound design, including the interplay of silence and explosive intensity, amplifies emotional tension and underscores the psychological stakes, contributing to the franchise's signature aesthetic. Music, particularly the recurring motifs composed by Jerry Goldsmith, plays a critical role in sustaining narrative and emotional continuity across the films. Themes of isolation, heroism, and sorrow are revisited and adapted in subsequent installments, linking the prequel and sequels to the established emotional landscape. The soundtrack amplifies the viewer's engagement with Rambo's internal struggle, heightening the impact of key sequences and reinforcing the psychological realism that defines the franchise. This careful attention to auditory storytelling demonstrates the franchise's commitment to multidimensional narrative construction, combining visual, emotional, and sonic elements into a cohesive whole. The international cultural impact of Rambo is significant. While originating in an American context, the character resonates with audiences worldwide, often symbolizing resilience, defiance, and moral complexity. Countries with histories of political conflict, societal unrest, or war have found particular relevance in Rambo's struggle against oppressive forces and institutional betrayal. Even where the films faced censorship or controversy due to graphic violence or politically sensitive content, interest and discussion frequently intensified, demonstrating the power of the character as a cultural touchstone. This cross-cultural appeal contributes to the franchise's longevity and global recognition. In terms of merchandising and media expansion, Rambo has remained consistently influential. Action figures, replicas, clothing, and video games allow fans to engage with the character beyond cinematic consumption. Iconic visual elements, including the red headband, combat knife, and bow and arrow, reinforce narrative continuity while providing immediately recognizable symbols of Rambo's identity. The franchise's expansion into gaming and interactive media also underscores its relevance to contemporary audiences, integrating elements of survival, strategy, and tactical problem-solving inspired by Rambo's cinematic portrayal. The prequel's exploration of Rambo's early life has implications for broader narrative themes. By examining formative relationships, initial exposure to trauma, and the development of moral frameworks, the film can illuminate how individual experiences shape identity, resilience, and ethical reasoning. These insights deepen the audience's understanding of Rambo's later actions, reinforcing the psychological and thematic cohesion of the franchise. The prequel also allows for engagement with historical and geopolitical contexts, integrating personal narrative with broader social commentary on the human cost of war and institutional failure. The philosophical and ethical dimensions of Rambo's story are central to its enduring significance. The character embodies the tension between survival, morality, and psychological endurance, illustrating that heroism is not merely defined by physical victory but by the ability to navigate ethical complexity under extreme conditions. Rambo's journey highlights the consequences of trauma, the burdens of violence, and the challenges of reintegration into society after conflict, offering audiences a compelling lens through which to examine human resilience and moral reasoning. This depth of characterization ensures that the franchise maintains relevance beyond the confines of traditional action cinema. Finally, the trajectory of the Rambo franchise demonstrates a careful balance between narrative closure and ongoing potential. While Last Blood provided emotional and narrative resolution for Stallone's portrayal, the prequel and potential future projects allow the mythology to expand while preserving continuity. By exploring Rambo's early development, moral evolution, and formative experiences, the franchise continues to engage audiences, provide opportunities for scholarly and cultural analysis, and sustain global cultural significance. Through its combination of action, psychological depth, ethical exploration, and iconic symbolism, Rambo remains a defining figure in cinematic history, one whose relevance and influence endure across generations. The lasting legacy of Rambo as both a cinematic and cultural icon lies in its capacity to combine spectacle with profound human insight. Over 4 decades, the franchise has explored themes of trauma, isolation, moral ambiguity, resilience, and survival, establishing a template for action storytelling that engages audiences both physically and emotionally. Unlike many long-running action franchises that rely on superficial thrills, Rambo is anchored in psychological realism, portraying a character whose extraordinary physical abilities are inseparable from profound emotional and moral struggles. This multidimensionality allows the franchise to resonate across time, cultures, and generations, ensuring its place in the canon of influential cinematic works. Rambo's enduring cultural influence is reflected not only in films but also in global popular imagination. His iconography, the red headband, bow and arrow, combat knife, has transcended cinema, appearing in video games, literature, art, cosplay, and merchandising. These symbols evoke survival, defiance, and perseverance, qualities that audiences worldwide identify with and admire. The franchise's global impact underscores the universality of its themes, demonstrating that the struggle against external and internal forces, the quest for justice, and the navigation of moral complexity resonate regardless of national, cultural, or linguistic boundaries. In this way, Rambo functions as a contemporary myth, a figure whose narrative continues to inspire, challenge, and captivate audiences on multiple levels. The prequel, John Rambo, represents both a continuation and an evolution of the franchise. By exploring the character's early experiences, the film has the potential to illuminate the formation of his survival instincts, moral reasoning, and psychological resilience. It offers a lens through which audiences can understand the trajectory from a young, vulnerable soldier to the hardened, haunted figure depicted in the original films. This narrative exploration reinforces the franchise's thematic continuity while introducing the character to a new generation of viewers, ensuring the relevance of Rambo's story in contemporary cinema. By carefully balancing action, psychological depth, and historical context, the prequel can honor the legacy of the franchise while expanding its mythology. The philosophical and ethical dimensions of Rambo's narrative remain central to its enduring appeal. The character embodies the tension between the instinct for survival and the complexities of morality, illustrating that heroism is defined not simply by victory or strength, but by the capacity to endure suffering, navigate ethical dilemmas, and confront the consequences of violence. His struggles with trauma, alienation, and moral ambiguity offer audiences a lens through which to explore broader questions about human resilience, justice, and the personal costs of conflict. This depth of characterization distinguishes Rambo from conventional action heroes, positioning the franchise as both an entertainment experience and a cultural study of human psychology under extreme conditions. Audience engagement with Rambo has consistently extended beyond the films themselves. Fan communities, online forums, social media, and participatory media such as cosplay, fan art, and fan fiction have all contributed to the sustained cultural relevance of the character. These communities analyze moral choices, speculate on hypothetical scenarios, and explore psychological and strategic elements of the character's actions. This interactive engagement ensures that Rambo remains a living cultural figure, continuously interpreted, debated, and celebrated across generations. The active participation of audiences in the Rambo universe demonstrates the franchise's power not only as a narrative phenomenon but also as a cultural and social one. Rambo's influence extends into interactive media, including video games and virtual experiences that draw on his survivalist tactics, strategic combat, and problem-solving approaches. The principles of stealth, resource management, environmental adaptation, and tactical ingenuity seen in Rambo films have become foundational elements in modern gaming, illustrating the character's reach beyond cinema. Through these platforms, Rambo's mythology engages audiences in immersive, participatory ways, extending the franchise's relevance in contemporary entertainment and reinforcing the enduring appeal of its core themes of survival and resilience. The franchise's cinematic techniques have set benchmarks within the action genre. Realistic stunt work, immersive cinematography, environmental interaction, and sound design all contribute to the visceral authenticity for which Rambo is known. The interplay of silence and explosive action, coupled with the emotional resonance provided by music and thematic motifs, ensures that each film delivers both intense spectacle and psychological depth. These elements work together to create a narrative experience that is physically thrilling, emotionally compelling, and morally engaging, cementing Rambo's status as a seminal work in the action genre. The global relevance of Rambo reflects its ability to transcend cultural and historical specificity. While the character originated in a particular American context, his struggles against oppression, institutional betrayal, and personal trauma have universal resonance. Audiences in Europe, Asia, Latin America, and beyond have interpreted Rambo as a figure of resilience, defiance, and moral complexity, demonstrating the character's adaptability to diverse socio-political contexts. Even when the films have been controversial or censored, interest and engagement have persisted, underscoring the character's enduring appeal and the franchise's capacity to provoke reflection on the human condition. Finally, the Rambo franchise exemplifies the delicate balance between narrative closure and ongoing potential. While Last Blood provided resolution to Stallone's portrayal, the prequel and potential future projects allow the mythology to expand without compromising continuity. By exploring formative experiences, ethical development, and psychological evolution, the franchise ensures ongoing engagement while honoring the established emotional and narrative framework. This balance, combined with the franchise's rich thematic content, psychological depth, and iconic symbolism, guarantees that Rambo remains a defining figure in cinema, an enduring symbol of resilience, survival, and the human struggle against adversity. In conclusion, the Rambo franchise stands as a landmark in action cinema, distinguished by its integration of visceral spectacle, psychological realism, and moral complexity. The character's enduring appeal rests on the interplay of physical prowess and emotional vulnerability, narrative tension and ethical ambiguity, and personal struggle within broader socio-political contexts. Through decades of films, global audience engagement, cultural symbolism, and evolving narrative exploration, Rambo has transcended the status of a mere action hero to become a cultural and philosophical touchstone. The prequel, ongoing fan engagement, and multimedia extensions ensure that the legacy of John Rambo will continue to influence cinema, popular culture, and cultural discourse for generations to come, cementing his place as an icon whose story resonates with the universal human experience of struggle, survival, and the pursuit of meaning in a complex and often hostile world. The future of the Rambo franchise is poised at an intriguing crossroads, balancing reverence for Sylvester Stallone's definitive portrayal with the narrative possibilities offered by the prequel and potential new installments. John Rambo provides an opportunity to explore the origins of his extraordinary skills, the early traumas that shaped his moral code, and the relationships that influenced his psychological development, offering audiences a deeper understanding of the man behind the legend. Beyond the films, Rambo's influence is expected to expand across interactive media, such as strategy-focused survival games, immersive virtual experiences, and even serialized storytelling on streaming platforms, reflecting the franchise's adaptability to evolving audience preferences. The enduring relevance of Rambo rests not merely on action spectacle but on the character's ability to evoke empathy, moral reflection, and cultural resonance, ensuring that his mythos continues to thrive in the 21st century and maintains a unique place in global cinematic and cultural discourse. Rambo's cultural impact extends far beyond cinema, as the character has become a symbol of resilience, defiance, and survival in the face of overwhelming odds. Across the globe, audiences have embraced him not just as an action hero, but as a metaphor for perseverance against oppression, injustice, and personal hardship. In countries with histories of political conflict or social instability, Rambo's narrative resonates deeply, often reflecting the struggles of ordinary individuals navigating adversity. The character's iconic visual elements, the red headband, combat knife, and bow and arrow, have become instantly recognizable symbols, used in merchandise, art, and fan creations worldwide. These elements reinforce his identity while providing continuity across films and media, creating a mythos that transcends specific historical or cultural contexts and positions Rambo as a universally understood figure of human endurance.